Okay, so we'll start with what you are here to hear about, the FAR Overhaul. The FAR Overhaul is an initiative of the executive branch, and it started with this Executive Order 14275. And this is one of those orders that emphasizes common sense. We've been hearing a lot about common sense in procurement. What does common sense mean? It's really hard for me to define. I'm not really a big fan of the term common sense. I like to have the data and the rules that are behind it. But this common sense is essentially looking at efficiencies in process, but even more so for this far overhaul, efficiencies in the number of pages that they use. The FAR is about 4,000 pages. And the main goal, it seems like, based on some of the recent parts that have come out, is to reduce the number of words and the number of pages in the FAR. So for all of you that are actually printing out the 4,000 pages in the FAR, oh, thank goodness. You can use a lot less ink, you can use a lot less paper. If you actually get the FAR on paper, somebody told me you have not been able to get the FAR on paper in at least 3 years. So the last FAR that you got is probably like 2020, 2021, if you actually got it on paper. But it's going to be a lot shorter because one of the main goals is just to reduce the word count and the page count. How are they doing that? They're shrinking to the FAR to provisions that are required by statute or necessary to, quote, support simplicity and usability, strengthen the efficacy of the procurement system, or protect economic or national security interests. So the main purpose is to reduce out things that are not required by statute, things that have been put in by prior administrations as policy, or just sort of interpretive elements. I was on the FAR drafting team for the small business section, which is Part 19. We'll be talking a lot about Part 19 as we go along. And oftentimes when we put together a rule in the FAR, we would have, this is what the statute says, or this is what we're passing down from SCBA, but also here's how you use it. Here's where you may want to use it on construction contracts or not on in this situation. Here's the time periods that you'd like to use. So sometimes a statute might not come out with a deadline, but we would put in a deadline in 30 or 60 days. And it seems like the effort is to take out that interpretive material in order to reduce the word count, reduce the page count, and overall, in terms of what they're talking about with common sense, reduce the regulatory burden of the FAR. The executive order sets a 180-day deadline, which from the date that the executive order came out would end up being October 12th. The talk around town is that they will actually try to finish that even before then and have it in place by the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. So moving that deadline up about 2 weeks in order to get everything done by September 30th. So that's really fast. We're in the middle of July. I assume a lot of these people are going to the beach on vacation, and they're going to come back and start cranking out these FAR sections once they come in. One note about the executive order is it does create a 4-year sunset for rules that meet that second condition, the one about being otherwise necessary to support simplicity and usability, strengthen the efficacy, or protect economic security interests. Those would sunset 4 years afterward, and FAR would have to bring them back if they're going to continue those rules. So I think there's being somebody who went to University of Virginia, I somewhat remember some of the stuff that Thomas Jefferson said, and I think that was one of the recommendations he said. If Congress passes the law, like 10 years later, you should go back. I think it was actually, we should have a revolution every 25 years. So this is now they came up with the revolutionary FAR overhaul. It just came to my mind. It's a Jeffersonian idea. So the way things work in the executive branch is when the president puts out an executive order, you need people to actually execute on that executive order. In the procurement system, the way that works is that the Office of Management and Budget, which is a policy office within the White House, right now it's led by Russell Floyd, or the Office of Federal Procurement Policy will issue directives to the federal workforce. In this case, the OMB did it. There's not a current confirmed head of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, so that came out under the OMB administrator's role or OMB director's role. And this came out in M2526. All of these OMB memos are numbered, so you can find this online. It goes over some of the same elements of the executive order. The point of this FAR overhaul, they did deem it, they trademarked the revolutionary FAR overhaul. So another government acronym, you'll hear RFO. What does RFO mean? Revolutionary FAR overhaul. It really gone in on the branding on this thing, and it's kind of too long for me, honestly. I'd like it to actually fit on a slide neatly in 40-point font. So for the rest of this, I call it far over. They do push the point that this is more than just shrinking the FAR. The benefit to businesses like your own is to reduce regulatory burden. They use the example of, you won't have to follow paper straw requirements anymore under this FAR. I don't know that. I've never had somebody from a small business call me and say, I don't know what straw to buy. Can you look at the FAR and tell me what straw to buy? But that is the example they use of reducing regulatory burden. And then certainly there are probably some things in there that create regulatory burden on businesses. I will get back to that point in a minute because they unfortunately are not telling us everything about what the burden is on small business and how this is actually working out to alleviate that burden. Along with the revolutionary FAR overhaul, the OMB and the Office of Management Budget, the FAR Council has Department of Defense, NASA, and GSA. They are releasing FAR text and then buying guides, or hypothetically they will be releasing buying guides, knowing the buying guides are actually out yet. And they're releasing several interpretive materials that I'll talk about in a bit, but that's in the OMB memo. It's a very fast process. As I mentioned, it's going to be wrapped up potentially by September 30th, or certainly under the executive order no later than October 12th. And once OMB and the FAR Council put the regulations out, they're supposed to be effective within 30 days. So, usually you have, you see something, and sometimes, especially with statutes, you might see time periods as long as 6 years. I think when we, at SBA, if you've heard the limitation on subcontracting, you guys are all small businesses, so you should know the limitation on subcontracting. It changed at one point, and it took over 6 years to get from the statute to a proposed rule at the FAR, and then it took another 2 years to get to the finding of the FAR. So you can have some really long timelines here. Super fast, 30 days. Agencies are issuing what's called deviations, which are changes in their policies that are separate from formal rulemaking. So it's not actually something that you can look up in the Code of Federal Regulations as a law. Instead, it's a deviation where the agency is saying, internally, we're going to make this change, and we're going to start using this revolutionary FAR with the whole process. That's how it's. And on that point, the reason that they're able to do this so quickly is they're avoiding a lot of the extra procedure that comes in rulemaking through notice and comment. Ordinarily, an agency will come out with a proposed rule, essentially a draft text of a rule, and the public will get to chime in on that through a formal notice process. You usually go to regulations.gov. You can submit your comments. The agency is required to read those comments and respond to those comments in a final rule. So that creates a really long time period between when the agency comes out with a draft and when the agency finalizes it. You have to allow time for everybody to read it, allow time for people to submit their comments, allow time for the agency to interpret those comments and respond to them, and then maybe act off of those comments. So, the HUBZone Council does this all the time. You heard Lizzie Sullivan, perhaps this morning, talk about how they participate a lot with SBA on rulemaking. So there's a lot of back and forth between the agency and the public through this notice and comment process. Just one good example is when SBA came out with its recent HUBZone proposed rule, there was something in there to require that employees work at least 80 hours per month, which was an increase from the existing 40 hours per month. There were a lot of HUBZone firms, and I imagine that I believe the HUBZone Council as well, saying that that's not really how we operate. That's really cut down the number of firms in the program and take away some of the value of the program. And SBA listened to that. So SBA went from, there at the table, where all this was happening, SBA went from 80 hours per month to 10 hours per week in order to alleviate some of the burden in the program. It was a bit of a change from the previous 40 hours per month, but still, it was mostly in response to the comments that were coming in from the public. That's not happening. We're not getting the drafts and then notice and comment and then the final rule before implementation. It's just going from the FAR overhaul to implementation. They will come and do notice and comment after the fact, after the whole overhaul process is done. It's not really clear how that's going to happen. But at that point, agencies will have already implemented the rules. So really, are they going to change that much of what's happening through the notice and comment? It remains to be seen.
So when they're posting it on the acquisition stuff, is that already with the deviations in place, or is that where we can't be commenting and that's in advance of the deviation?
No, they're posting it and then agencies are deviating. You do have the opportunity to comment at that point. There's a box. But if you go to the FAR Overhaul website, which is acquisition.gov slash, I think it's just slash FAR dash overhaul, there's a box in the top right-hand corner that allows for informal comment from the public. That's different from the notice and comment process. The main difference is you don't get to see everybody else's comments. When HUBZone Council submitted comments to SBA on HUBZone, other HUBZone firms could read that and say, "Oh, I agree," or this is another area that would hurt HUBZone firms. When you submit something in that box, it goes to somebody's inbox at GSA, but you can't see the rest of the comments that are there. But the point is,
read in advance and maybe changing before it gets to the agency?
no. Once that text is out there, that text is what agencies are using to deviate. That now the farm might take action on those informal comments when they get to this notice and comment process, but the agencies are using the FAR overhaul text, what they call the model deviation, in order to issue their deviations and make it active within 30 days. So it is very, very fast and certainly allows for less public engagement on the rules as they come through. So the FAR has 50 parts. I know everybody knows part 52, and you probably thought, oh, there are 52 parts to the FAR. You notice you skip 20 and 21 here. It goes from 19 to 22. So there are actually only 50 parts because you take away 20 and 21. There is a part 53 to the forms. 53. So I'm just going to count the 50 parts so far. And here are the parts that overhauled. 1, 6, 10, 11. Well, that's on the next slide. The important part to mention is 19. That's the big one that we all care about in this room. We've heard a lot about it. Every single session that I've gone to with a lawyer has talked about FAR Part 19. What's going to happen with FAR Part 19? I'm one of the drafters of FAR Part 19. I'm very anxious about what's going to happen to the handiwork of me and my colleagues, some of which have retired and left the government. But we spent a long time putting together SBA regulations and then the implementation of those regulations through FAR Part 19. So I'm eager to see, now that I'm out of the government, what the people are going to do with this thing that has been our baby for quite some time. FAR Part 19, I'll go over what it covers, but it covers everything that SBA does in government contracting, from HUBZone program, 8A program, certificates of competency, the PCR coordination, subcontracting is a big part of it. So there's going to be a lot of work to streamline FAR Part 19. And also, a lot of it is based on statute. So I imagine in terms of timing, everybody's going to ask me, when do you think FAR Part 19 is going to come out? Some people said, oh, it was supposed to come out earlier in July, or it's going to come out in early August. My bet is that it will be toward the end. And that may be strategic in terms of trying to be after the consideration of the National Defense Authorization Act, or because maybe people will be so busy with the end of the fiscal year stuff. But my reason for why it might be coming at the end is just that it's a lot of work. And these people are already going through all these other parts of the FAR. And so what I've seen is the parts that have gone out early are some of the shorter ones. 10 and 11 are pretty short. It's the IT one, I think 34 is pretty short. So they seem to be trying to send things out as they're done, and 19 is just going to take longer to get finished. So my prediction is maybe completely wrong. It'll come out like while we're talking here. If anybody's online, he wants to chime in and say, "Oh, FAR Part 19's out," then it could be coming out soon. But my prediction is mid to late September for FAR Part 19. So here's the actual description of the ones that have come out. FAR Part 1 is the one that's famous for saying if it's not illegal, then a contracting officer can do it, or if it's not prescribed, if it's not prescribed in the FAR, the contracting officer still has discretion to do stuff. So those principles are still in there. We'll go through some of the ones that affect small business, which are 6, 10, and 18. And then there are a few other ones like taxes. I've never really read the part on taxes. I did have a state tax issue one time where does the federal government have to pay state tax? That may be covered in there, but I imagine that doesn't come up all that often for you in your practice. 31, I did read through. 31 doesn't come into play mostly for small business because you tend to have fixed price contracts. So you don't have to worry about cost accounting. But even if you do, the changes to 31 were in substantive terms very minor. They did boast about reducing Part 31 by 1,300 words, but those were mostly duplicative definitions or definitions that really aren't going to make a difference in the experience of applying 31. And then you have a few other ones, 34. So IT one is 39. That's one thing there, modifications that have come out. So some of these came out very early on in May. June, we saw a big rush of ones affecting small business. And then July, people have been at the beach. I can tell you, it has been very quiet in July. We got 31 and 29. That's all we've gotten in July so far. Or maybe they're here. Okay. So along with the new overhaul text, which they're calling the model deviation. So this is the text where the agencies are adopting that text. That'll essentially be the text that comes out for notice and comment later. But it's really the overhaul text is the one that agencies are using for the rest of this fiscal year and into the beginning of the next fiscal year. The drafters of the FAR overhaul have put together additional materials. They're available on acquisitions.gov. One is a list of FAQs. The FAQs are short and they're somewhat interesting. There is one section that's directed at vendors about what should vendors do in response to the FAR overhaul, and not that much information. I mean, there's really not much for you to act on. I do want to make a point about that. I'll go ahead and do it now, which is one of the functions that SBA has is to ensure that agencies issue small business guidance with all of their regulations. You usually call it a small business compliance guide. And one of my secrets when I was the policy person at SBA is I would always read the small business compliance guide first whenever a new rule comes out, because the compliance guide provides plain language interpretation of new policies and rules directed at small business. So, if I'm here and I care about small business, that's what I want to see, because I want to see how does the agency think about this in terms of affecting small business. This FAR overhaul does not have a small business compliance guide. There's nothing there for vendors other than like 4 FAQs that are on this website. There's really nothing there for vendors to use to interpret what is happening in the FAR overhaul. There are a lot of other materials. There's agency deviations, a practitioner's guide, opportunity for contracting officers to get CLPs. But those are directed primarily internally within the government for contracting officers, contracting officer representatives, contract specialists. There's nothing out there for small businesses to understand what has happened in these overhauled parts. And I think that's a tragedy that small businesses are not getting the interpretive information that they need as it's coming out. So you're getting it here. You can go to govconintelligence.com and get more of it for free. There are a bunch, I'm not just going to hype my website. There are a bunch of law firms, Miles and Stockbridge, Polero Mazza, who's sponsoring this conference, that are also putting out material about the FAR overhaul. Wiley has a website about the FAR overhaul. So there's bits and pieces out there that you can get just online. So essentially the private sector has had to fill that void, even though it's the statutory responsibility of the drafters of regulations to put out a small business compliance guide. We're really up on that at SBA, and that seems to have gone to the wayside. I'm not really sure why. Can you repeat that website? My website is govconintelligence.com. govconintelligence.com.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to go into the small business parts. One sad point in my career as a small business advocate is seeing the release of this overhauled Part 10. So I'll start with the bad news, and hopefully we'll get to some better news as we go on. Part 10 was a bit of a disaster for small businesses. The existing FAR Part 10 has 10 protections and references to small business from I'll just go back. Part 10 is the part that contracting officers look at when they are organizing an acquisition and trying to find businesses that might bid on that acquisition. They're doing the market research, same thing that the large businesses do when they're looking for subcontractors, that you might be doing a small business when you're looking for partners. And still call it the current FAR because it hasn't officially changed, but the current FAR, or the FAR that was prior to the overhaul, had 10 protections for small business in Part 10. They included looking for set-aside opportunities, working with SBA, Small Business Administration, procurement center representatives to do market research. FAR deleted all 10 of those references. There's not a single reference to small businesses in Part 10 anymore. Now, I will mention, before I say that the world's going to end because contracting officers are no longer looking at small businesses, there's two things that would still encourage contracting officers to look at small business. One is maybe it'll be in the buying guide. They say there's going to be a buying guide that comes out as well. So contracting officers will look as part of procedure rather than by statute to look at small businesses. Oh, by the way, another thing that was in there as a protection was to look at whether the contract is bundled or consolidated and could be broken up for small businesses. Because you have a really big contract, you're not getting as much small business competition as large. So that was another thing that was taken out of this FAR Part 10. So number one, the solace is contracting officers might be following the buying guide. Number two is Department of Defense has a special requirement from National Defense Authorization Act of 2006, all the way back to 2006. So Section 816 or 813 of 2006 NDAA that requires DoD to do small business market research. It's about looking for a significant number of small businesses before you move on to a tiered acquisition. So DoD at least still has a requirement to do small business market research. DoD is more than 50% of government buying. So, taking it out for civilian agencies, that's certainly bad, but at least you have half of the government that's still required to do market research. That is, unless that 2006 NDA provision gets eliminated and it is on the list to be repealed for whatever reason. I'm not asking. For whatever reason, it's on deck to be repealed in the Senate version of the NDA. So that DoD additionally would also not have to do small business market research. Also in this Part 10, I mentioned this is a disaster for small business. It was not just that they eliminated 10 mentions of small business. It was also that the Part 10 implemented the executive order that requires the use of government-wide contracts. OMB just came out with a memo on that, 2531, about going to government-wide contracts first, using best-in-class contracts, using category management. I know from my own experience at SBA that category management and the increased use of government-wide contracts hurts the small business industrial base in multiple ways. One way is it discourages new entrants because in order to get a contract, you need to be on the contract. So there's no way to really get in the door. And the second is it makes these contracts much larger so that you're forced to give up some of your independence as a small business in order to get on these contracts, usually through joint ventures or mentor protege. Some people have done very well in joint ventures and mentor protege, and more power to you. But there's some small businesses that don't want to do that. And if they're not in the position to do that, it makes it really hard to get these GWACs. The comments have already closed on this new FAR Part 10. Another section that referred to small business, Part 18, that had 10 references to small business as well. Guess what happened to those? Again, 10 for 10 in getting out references to small business. So this is 100%. This is a lot better than Aaron Judge. The 10 for 10 and deleting references to small business. 1,000% batting average on getting rid of small business between Part 10 and Part 19. Most of those were in reference to discretionary authorities. So it said things like a contracting officer may use a small business set aside, or a contracting officer may use an 8A contract. It deleted all of those mays. So, maybe that's not so bad. It'll end up in the buying guide, perhaps. What that does signal to me is when we're looking at things like Part 19, look very closely at whether a sentence starts with may, because that probably puts it on a chopping block for being eliminated if the FAR overhaul. These informal comments are still open. You have until what 5, 6, 7, 8 Monday, right? You have until Monday if, uh, especially if you work in contingency contracts or disaster contracts. This is the sort of guidance that agencies use when they're responding to a disaster. So if you're working in that area, it probably is worth it to put something together by Monday and say, hey, you took out 10 references to small business, but we're still here and we're actually more efficient. We're a better value than large contractors. So you should put something back into FAR Part 18, or at least put something in the buying guides for the eventual release of this important part of the FAR. And then earlier this month, we had FAR Part 6 come out. There was a bit of the hubbub in the community on what happened to the small business provisions in FAR Part 6, because when you look at the FAR Overhaul website, there's a document there called the line out, which crosses through the previous FAR language in order to show how many words they cut. And one of the things that was lined out in FAR Part 6 were the references to the HUBZone program, 80 program, service able vet program, women health program. It's like, oh my God, did they take out all the small business programs? How can they do that? They take out all the small business programs? What they don't tell you with the line out is it's only the deletions. They're not putting in the additional information into that document. So it's not, you've heard of a LELO, that's another one of those government acronyms, line in, line out. It's not a LELO. It's not a line in, line out. It's just the crossouts. So the eventual reading of FAR Part 6 is not quite as alarming, because when you look at what they did, they actually put in new language that covers all of the programs in a shorter number of words. So they took out all the references to 8A, HUBZone, well, they kept 8A, but all references to HUBZone, service disabled vet, women owned, and replaced it with a broad reference to SBA programs in so-called Chapter 14A. I honestly, I've been working in this field for 20 years. I did not know what 14A is. 14A is the reference to the whole Small Business Act. So it includes everything SBA does, disasters, loans, SBDCs, all of that stuff. It's all of 14A. So you said, oh, you can still follow 14A. What is in 14A? I don't know. What exactly are you talking about? I think it would be much more clear if they said you follow 8A, or you follow the HUBZone Act, or you follow the Veterans Opportunity Act. But okay, they want as few words as possible. I guess 14A counts as one word, whereas like HUBZone Act counts as two different words and all these different words. So they shortened it all to 14A.
So my opinion is not taken out for if it's not part of 14A.
No, 8A is part of 14A. The reason they refer to 8A is because of the entity, well, it's the higher sole source thresholds for 8A they're only active for 8A. There's a higher sole source threshold that mostly applies to entity-owned firms, that allows entity-owned firms to get $25 million in civilian agencies through 8A sole source contracts and $100 million at DOT. So they kept that provision in FAR Part 6 with only reference to 8A. And that does not exist within the other programs, including HUBZone, service able vet, 25. There is one good thing that comes out of FAR Part 6. If you're an innovative company, the FAR instituted the sole source authority for SBIR Phase 3, which is the so-called commercialization stage of the SBIR program. That had been proposed by the FAR like 4 years ago. It's been in the statute for a long time, and certainly been in SBA's policies in the policy directive for SBIR for quite some time. But it now appears for the first time in a FAR document in this FAR Part 6, ahead of what actually appears in the normal FAR. So they did give small businesses something in this FAR Part 6. So if you are a participant in the SBIR program, you can now point to the FAR overhaul and say, hey, I can get a sole source contract through SBIR Phase 3. FAR Part 6 was just released in July, so comments are still open, and they're open until August 11th. I would encourage people to comment on the fact that it's not clear anymore when the FAR is referring to 14A, and that does not, particularly if you're a HUBZone firm, that does not make specific reference to HUBZone. So that means that contracting officers going to look at that. They're not going to know what 14A is either. And they're certainly not going to think, oh, 14A means I can use the HUBZone program. We were talking earlier this morning about trying to push agencies to use some of the HUBZone sole source authority, and the women-owned and service-able vet program. No one's going to be able to understand that from looking at 14A or whatever 14A looks like. Previously, it said you can use a HUBZone sole source, and they've replaced that with reference. So that is something that if you are willing, that I would encourage you to comment on. All right, what else are we looking for small business? Part 7 has the protections against bundling. And this is a graph showing the amount of bundling in the federal government. Bundling means agencies are taking smaller contracts that went to small businesses and bundling them all together, combining them, mashing them together, and awarding them as full and open, presumably to large businesses. And that has increased exponentially. Doesn't matter the administration, but it's gone up almost from this looks like it's about 75 to over $300 billion in just 1 year. So that's a lot of small business contracts that are getting combined and potentially going to large businesses through this bundling process. And Part 7 requires agencies to go through a calculation process. They have to figure out what the benefits of bundling are and whether that overcomes the loss to the industrial base, as well as go through a justification and approval process, sometimes at very high levels if they're not able to justify it for their calculations. We mentioned Part 19 a few times. Here's what's in Part 19. You've got the size standard, whether you're small or not. You've got PCR coordination with SBA. You have small business set-asides, certificate of competency. That's where a firm can be found responsible for a contract by SBA after an appeal to SBA. You've got the subcontracting portions. And then, of course, all the socioeconomic programs, 8A, HUBZone, service-able vet, women. All of these are covered by Part 19. It's basically everything for small business except for that bundling portion. And speaking of May, we're talking about, are they going to take out everything that has May? I actually should correct this because I found that the first May in Part 19 refers to May the month, not to May the word. So really it's 194 times, for these purposes that May appears. But there's a lot of Mays in subcontracting, by the way. So things like, if you're familiar with the contracting officer usually puts goals in terms of percentage of the whole contract, but you may put goals also in terms of the percent subcontracted. So that's a May. That might be coming out if they're going to go through all these Mays. And of course, these socioeconomic programs, they're all discretionary, right? You're not forced to award. There used to be a mandate for HUBZone way back when I started at SBA, but that was eliminated in 2010. Now everything's a May. 8A, HUBZone, service-able vet, unless you're the VA, and women, those are all Mays. I don't think they're going to take out all those Mays. That would be a really big, drastic step. But I imagine that a lot of the wording of those programs within that discretion is going to change in Part 19. And of course, I'll cover it at my website, GovCon Intelligence. One note on the Rule of Two. The Rule of Two was one of my passion projects while I was at SBA. I worked on rule along with the White House and all the agencies. We did a lot of coordination, right, Leo? We did a lot of coordination among the agencies to try to expand the Rule of Two from just contracts to multiple award contracts, using the example of the VA, which has a Rule of Two across contracts as well as multiple award contracts. So we want to basically take that VA example and spread it out across the government. Rule of Two, in very short form, is agency has to award to a small business if there are 2 or more small businesses that can do the work at a fair market price. Very simple. 2 or more have to award to a small business. Usually do that for a set aside. That Rule of Two is not, for the most part, it is not statutory. So that potentially could be on the chopping block. There is a Rule of Two that is in the statute for $250,000 and below, or simplified acquisition threshold and below. That's called the mandatory reserve. It's between the micro purchase and simplified acquisition threshold. But for the most part, the Rule of Two above that simplified acquisition threshold, it's not statutory. All it comes from is the requirement that the government must award a fair proportion of contracts to small businesses. When they do that, they're using this rule of two. So what's going to happen to the rule of two? That's the big question. Are they going to keep it in 19.502-2? Are they going to move it into a buying guide and leave it up to agency procedures? Maybe DoD will have it, but other agencies won't. One possibility that I've been thinking about in the week of the middle light is I mentioned when I was at SBA, we grew small business contracting by 50% to 28.7%. Does anybody know what the small business goal is government-wide? 23. 23 is the answer. 23%. So one thing that might happen, this is just Sam Lee talking. I don't want anybody to get any bad ideas from this, but it's like, hey, if we're above 23%, then you don't have to use the rule of two because we've already met the government's goal. Yeah, that's a little scary because 28%, going from 28% to 23% is a long way. That's billions and billions of dollars that will be lost if you kind of just use the goals as the ceiling for small business contracting. Some reading the tea leaves. What do we think about the rule of two? Well, one thing is the FAR Council, which is also running the FAR Overhaul, officially withdrew that order level proposed rule of two that I've worked on with other agencies and with the administration. So they withdrew that, saying that they need to finish up the FAR overhaul process and that it was based on the previous administration's policies, which are not consistent with the dates when executive orders from. So that does not particularly bode well. And also GSA and the FAR Council published legislative proposals last week that refer to long-standing regulatory set-asides, but don't refer to the rule of two in itself. So I don't know if that's anti-rule of two, but it does somewhat suggest that they don't want mandatory set-asides, that perhaps you might be looking at the rule of two turn into a discretionary application rather than debate. We'll see what happens when it comes time. I have this is where I come up with the subtitle of this presentation, which is be a little worried about this, but is there really anything we can do about it? I don't know. It's not like I can, people watching online and saying, oh, well, Sam Lee said this, we should do this. I don't think that's happening. I think they probably have already made up their mind. And we will find out September what the rule of two states and the act. And then, that's where you can really mobilize and contact your congressional representatives or already bill out there, say, oh, they took this out. The rule of two has been around since 1964. So we need to be current. Okay. I have about 20 minutes for the HUBZone data deep dive. So one thing I do in my spare time is I code data. I put together something called the Data Hub. Is that SBA's website? It's a free resource for companies to get access to federal contracting data. So I did that when I was at SBA. Now I'm doing it outside at govconintelligence.com. You go to my website here, subscribe for free. And just earlier this week, I did a data deep dive into the HUBZone program. On the occasion of the 25th anniversary of this conference, I wanted to do something special with this conference. So surely this is my gift to the HUBZone Council. Okay, so this is a graph of HUBZone dollars by fiscal year. The little small bar at the end is FY25. This is not really a fair comparison because the previous bars are the end of the fiscal year versus the middle of this fiscal year. So this data was run this Monday. So all of these include the whole fourth quarter, and then the last one doesn't. But what I really wanted to show is HUBZone dollars have been going up. They leveled last year. This is about 17 billion, but they had been going up for the last 9 years before that, before they leveled off. And then right now, as of Monday, we were at $7.3 billion in HUBZone dollars. Now, I'll do the next slide and I'll explain what HUBZone dollars means in this context. So this is where I've taken all of the previous bars and moved them down to the same dates as this bar. It's not actually all from Monday because Department of Defense data is delayed. If anybody uses SAM.gov or you're looking at some of these websites with public data, all the Department of Defense data is delayed by 90 days. So the comparison point for that is actually April rather than July. So if you move all the other previous years down, you do see a bit of a drop from 2024 to 2025. This number here is 7.9. This number here is 7.3. These are all at my website, by the way. One of these, but it's not as big a drop as compared to where it was 2 years ago. It's certainly a slight drop, but you've probably seen that across all economic. So, HUBZone dollars. What does HUBZone dollars mean? HUBZone dollars is a term from the SBA scorecard, because the SBA scorecard evaluates agencies against government-wide goals based on dollars going to businesses with that designation. It doesn't matter how those dollars come through. They could be through a HUBZone set aside, they can be through a sole source, they can be through 8A, they could be through a service stable vet set aside. So HUBZone dollars just means all of the dollars that the government is spending with a HUBZone business, regardless of how it's getting to that business. When I was looking at this, I wanted to look closely at what really is the benefit of the HUBZone program and where are some of the bright signs for the HUBZone program. So one thing I did is I broke down where those HUBZone dollars are going and how they're coming through to HUBZone firms. This big block here is small business set aside. So almost a third of the HUBZone dollars are getting to HUBZone firms just through normal small business set asides, just through, you didn't have to necessarily be in the HUBZone program. You just had to self-certify as a HUBZone. This block here are contracts that were not set aside at all. So about 20% are going through non-set asides. Now I do have, this is called the HUBZone price evaluation preference. That's down here. That's a 2% slice here. The HUBZone price evaluation preference is for, you get a 10% price evaluation preference for full and open competition when it's not set aside. I think some of these 20% are really price evaluation preference. It's just not labeled like that. But the point is, over 50% of dollars that are going to HUBZone firms are going through either full and open or small business set aside. Things that bad coding or bad contract recording notwithstanding, do not require HUBZone stats. Now, this one here, this is the HUBZone set aside. That's about 15%. So that does require HUBZone status. Here's the HUBZone price evaluation preference. That certainly is a big benefit of the HUBZone program. And there have been legislative proposals to expand that. That's about 2%. And then the little slice, this little orange slice right here, that's HUBZone sole source. Very, very small part of government contracting. HUBZone sole source. What's the percentage? On the HUBZone sole source, that's like less than 1%. I think if I believe that's in like less than 1.5. So I'm not sure. I just like millions of dollars, like billions.
And Sam, that's just the percentage of the HUBZone dollars that's paid, not of total.
Not of total. So we're going to get to percent of total later on this day. So here's how those dollars break down. It's a total to this point in the fiscal year of 1.2 billion. In previous years, it's been up to almost 4 billion. 3.28 last year. So what these numbers are, the total number of dollars that are going to HUBZone firms through authorities that require HUBZone status. This includes set asides, it includes sole source, it includes price evaluation preference. So and again, it's not fair to the last year because these are end of the year numbers for the previous years. If I bring those down to the current date, here's where we are. It's a bit of a drop off. This is 1.3 billion. This is 1.2 billion. So it is the lowest point in 6 years. It's not that much lower. We're not doom and gloom here on the HUBZone program, but it is at a low point among these 6 years, still higher than the 4 years before that. So 1.2 billion in dollars that are going through the HUBZone preferences or authorities that require HUBZone status. SBA started reporting this information on its scorecard this year. They just replaced the scorecard 2 weeks ago. I actually wrote this scorecard. And so I wrote out this information and it shows, I think this was what Shirley's question was getting at, that HUBZone set asides, and here they're not counting the price evaluation preference. So it's just set aside from sole source. It accounts for $2.8 billion, only 0.44% of federal spending. It's a really tiny amount, 0.44%. There is a 3.3% goal. The government got to 2.75%, a little bit down from the previous year, which had been a high point over the previous 10 years. But This set aside number is the really surprising one that only 0.44% of federal contracting dollars goes through HUBZone set asides. Although women owned set aside is actually even smaller. That's 0.35%. The big ones are small business set aside. Small business set aside accounts for 11%, which is more than all the other ones combined. And next in line is the 8A authorities with 4%.
One thing to note there, that doesn't, if you added up those, it doesn't equal 23%.
Right. So the government is not even reaching, if you add up all the, it's probably it's about probably about 20, based on what I'm seeing here. It's about 20. So the government is not spending 23% of its dollars through set aside. So that means the rest of it is going through foreign open competition, the small businesses. So here's how that percentage works at this point in the fiscal year. Right now we're at 0.34%, which again is the lowest in 6 years as compared to previous years. So at this point in the year, there's going to be more set asides toward the end of the year as agencies try to get out the end of the year money, or at least that's what we assume will happen. In previous years, it's been as high as 0.4 at this point. Now we're at 0.24. Here are the agencies that are using those HUBZone preferences. The Air Force is well ahead of all the other agencies in using the preference. Air Force, followed by Navy, and then way behind that is Army. And then you start getting into civilian agencies, USCIS, and DLA sneaks in there from DoD, NASA, Job Corps. I saw somebody from the Job Corps here yesterday. They're very successful in using HUBZone as well. And you can find the rest of this top 20 list on the website. And here it is by percentage, just to see which agencies are really hitting the HUBZone set asides hard as we get to the fourth quarter here. USCIS is well ahead at using 7% of its contracting dollars with HUBZone set asides. Job Corps has 5%. Federal Highway Administration has 2.7%. Food and Nutrition Service at USDA, 2.6%. So you have some agencies here. TSA is in there, Customs and Border, GSA's Public Building Services in there as well. So these are the ones that are utilizing the HUBZone authorities, the HUBZone set aside a great deal. And this is all FY25. This is like as of Monday. NAICS codes, no surprise that in small business government contracting, computer-related services at the very top, you're supposed to all the programs. But HUBZone is unique in that there's a lot of construction firms in HUBZone. 8A is the same as well. So you have construction second. Then you do have a few manufacturing makes in here. Cheese manufacturing does very well. You really does something about that. There are a lot of Wisconsin firms, cheese production, and then a few other ones, plumbing, heating, and air conditioning. You see that show up in this as well. And then apparel manufacturing, I think, see them in the top 20 makes codes. If you want to look at percentage, there's cheese manufacturing again. HUBZone cheese manufacturer in this room. Fat and oil refining and blending. So apparel, when you get these percentages, it does get a little weird. But you do see some areas where HUBZone firms are getting a good amount of set asides. Landscaping, roofing, plumbing, heating, and air conditioning. Some of the technical trades are in these top categories for HUBZone firms. So they're still being quite successful in certain industries that may be more consistent with the goals of HUBZone. You want to look at firms by firms. I have this list of firms. Blue Tech out of California is by far the largest recipient of HUBZone set aside dollars, saving over a quarter, 26% of HUBZone preference dollars in FY25, followed by GovSmart out of Virginia, Pan American Computers, and PM Perkins Group. I don't know. All this again, very small font here, but on the website.
So, Sam, is this BA like when they see the unbalanced distribution like this? I mean, Florida, the word there's the one company.
That is a lot.
Is there anybody that ends up on their desk and they figure this out or resolve or fix it? I mean, from not being that company, we want to fix.
Yeah, that is an
if you are that company, I guess you're like, no, it's funny.
That is an uncomfortable question for me to answer. Honestly. Well, the term you hear about SBA a lot is risk-based review. Risk-based review. How much risk is any misunderstandings or miscommunications or potential fraud facing to the agency against the size of the firm and how much it's getting in benefits. Origination. So these are new contracts that are coming out. How many new contracts are being issued with the HUBZone authorities? And here's where you see a pretty good drop. So last year, this is year to date. So this is not end of the year. We had a big year in 2023. There, at this point, there were 2,600 HUBZone set aside contracts issued by this point in time. Last year, there was a big drop off to 2,000. And then you see another drop off here by about 20% to 1,500. So these are contracts over $10,000. So that means that there have been only 1,539 set aside HUBZone contracts issued as of Monday. 90 days back.
And I'm going to point out that that was probably due to SBA's push and those years of really pushing the HUBZone program and getting out there to the agencies and encouraging it. And then in 24, the HUBZone program office is expanding. It's doing. So I think we're going to see a continuous drop in that.
Yeah.
Because there was a huge push to get out to the agencies.
Yes. Lori Gillen is not walking through that door.
Yeah.
There's no HUBZone director anymore. There's no HUBZone office. It's all been combined with the other certification offices. So that's a really good point that agencies are not hearing HUBZone from SBA anymore, and that they be responsible for this first drop, which is actually, I think, more than the drop from 24 to 25. Interesting. So overall diversification is just so you have a comparison point, not nearly as much. I mean, there's still a drop, but it's not that 20% overall. And here's the dollar amount. So if you think, oh, maybe that's fewer, but there's a lot more dollars. That's not. There's also at a low point dollars, $1 billion in HUBZone originations. So where are these dollars going? A lot of them are to the great state of Virginia that we're in right now. 390 of those contracts have gone to Virginia, and you see a lot of other big states up here, California, Florida. Oregon's what's in there. And this is Guam right here. So Guam has the 5th highest number of HUBZone origination contracts in its fiscal year. Pretty interesting. I did this by map here. Guam is like all the way over here, right? So Guam did not make it on this map, but I didn't want to use my orange and blue color scheme. So it's kind of nice that Virginia gets colored in. California, Florida, Oregon, also a big recipient, Ohio, there as well. What some of the agencies for these originations? This is probably worth going to the website to blow up this table. But you do see some agencies that, mostly it's down because overall government is down. But you do see some agencies with these green boxes that are even ahead of where they were last year in coming up with HUBZone contracts. This one is Air Force. This one is NASA. This one is USCIS, DLA, and Public Building Service is also there in green. So those are opportunities you may be looking for if you're HUBZone. These are the agencies that are still using the HUBZone program to even more of an extent that they were in the previous year. And then as far as industries, construction, highway construction, patrol services is green, industrial building construction, plumbing, heating, and air conditioning are green. The other top ones, you have some in red, but it may be worth looking at the percentages. Some of these are really small, down 1% as compared to down 20% government-wide. So you still want to look at some of these top industries and get an idea of where the opportunities are. Maybe you're in a related industry and you could switch over to an industry that has a lot of HUBZone action. And I have left about 3 minutes for questions if anybody happens to have questions.
Sure. So with the contracting falling exam, what is the authority for large businesses to transact with small businesses? I know that there are things like small business license plans that are kind of given by IBON or words.
Right.
So what is that authority, and is that being refined in the quality run?
It's primarily through subcontracting, which is part of FAR Part 19, or subcontracting plans. All prime contractors that are not small businesses have subcontracting plans, subcontracting opportunities. And that is a very long part of FAR Part 19. That will probably be cut down significantly. I'm uncertain how they're going to do that because a lot of that is in statute. Remember, one of the principles is that you keep what's ever in statute. The statute for subcontracting is very long. subcontracting plans require agencies to use not just small business subcontractors, but socioeconomic programs, and that includes HUBZone. And that includes a 3% government-wide goal for HUBZone. I think last year the government did not even get to 2%. It was like 1.8% for small business subcontractors. So that's actually a big benefit for those of you who are watching the downturn in prime contracting. These prime contractors, the large companies, still have HUBZone requirements in their subcontracting goals. And there's only 4,575 HUBZone firms out there. So it's kind of limited competition to get the subcontracts to count towards those goals.
That's sort of like an easy way to identify which parts of the FAR are statutory versus which ones are guidance or other information.
Okay, easy way.
Yeah. It's like easy.
Do you know any good lawyers? I imagine based on what I've heard around here that they're using AI to do that. They're putting statutes in and saying what in this FAR is statutory and what's not. The problem is the statutes, like I mentioned, the 2006 NDAA, they're not going back to statutes from 2006 to put them in. They're just taking 14A and they're putting that in. And those of you who work with AI, eventually AI says, that's too much context. That's too many words for us to do. Maybe they have super functional AIs and they could do that. But I think that's what they're doing. They're just using statutes. They put it in. Some of those statutes are written differently. I mean, a great example is most statutes say shall, whereas the FAR says must. So it's not going to be perfect, and anybody who uses AI knows it makes a lot of mistakes. And you might see some of those mistakes here. I found a typo in the FAR that came out a couple of weeks ago. So the AI is not perfect.
Well, then it can point us in the right direction.
Yes. Yeah. If there's a part you're interested in, I can certainly look at it with my own head rather than AI.
And did you submit a comment to point out the typo?
Oh, I should do that. Yes, I should do that. Yeah, I'm sure they'll notice it at some point. Some of these close things.
So would the possible also be ruled to get a consideration for small business with that agents? Does it then roll to whatever goals are put on them by SBA? And their virtue, we have the SBA Act, so we can tell you if we need to. And is that
right?
What maybe consideration of small businesses would be?
Yeah. So if the rule of two is eliminated, then it would fall to SBA to encourage agencies to meet their goals. Now, one of the challenges there is a lot of first of all, yes, it's goals. And also a lot of the contracting is going to be done by GSA.
Yeah.
So if Department of State has a goal, is GSA really going to care about whether the Department of State is meeting their goal? It's a little different when you have contracting officers that are reporting to the same people that are trying to carry out those goals. But from the SBA side, when SBA is in the room advocating, the first argument is rule of two. We found it's very easy. Two small businesses can do this. You have to set this aside. If you don't have that, which has been the case in orders for quite some time, the rule of two has not existed on multiple award contracts, and that's now been withdrawn at the FAR. The next argument is, well, you need to meet this goal, and you haven't met your HUBZone. So in that way, it kind of helps actually that HUBZone is not then meeting the goal. HUBZone and women-owned have not met the government-wide goal, and HUBZone's even farther behind. The women-owned is 2.75 versus a 3% goal. So SBA can come in and say, you need to use HUBZone set aside for this because you're not meeting this goal, and the government-wide not moving its goal too. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And please sign up for our website, govconintelligence.com.
Do you have your slides posted in